16
people.
Okay, it is 1 o'clock right now, so we will hold off for about 5 more minutes to wait for anybody that may be experiencing any technical difficulties joining the Zoom chat here. So please bear with us for a couple more minutes. We got 18 participants.
Just on a comical note, I'm a little bit leery about this meeting. It's because it's starting with 666 password.
It's 4 6s.
Add the fourth 6, will be fine.
Yeah.
That's a random number that came up.
Yeah. Still getting some people. Yeah.
I learned to bring my phone so that if somebody's emailing me. Where's the hard way? So you need to know too that I've set it so that it will.
All right, we'll begin the public consultation meeting for the administrative building 2 in St. Regis demolition project. I am Daryl Seymour, Director of Department of Infrastructure and Housing. We have with us our project team from PSPC, Public Service Procurement Canada. We have Catherine Gold, part of the engineering consultants for the abatement procedures. Stephen Heikela, sorry if I mispronounced that, from WSP. We have Cameron Flood from Cleveland Jardine. And we also have Maureen Mirza from Indigenous Services,
Services Canada.
Indigenous Services Canada, Community Infrastructure, Ontario Region, Capital Management Officer with us on the meeting today. So this is basically, we're having this meeting as due to the restrictions put on place for public meetings. And this would, I think, might be the first time for a public, in Akwesasne, for a public meeting such as this type. And if you can bear with us on any technical difficulties that we may experience during this meeting. The time scheduled is from 1 to 2:30, and I am being told that at 2:30, I think the Zoom will cut out promptly without anything. So we'll try to keep this as a good pace going with getting out all the information to all the people. And at the end, we do have a scheduled question period, which we will take questions via Facebook, either on Facebook Live, I guess, on Facebook communications account, via communications email, and any other way that we can get the questions to us, and we'll have our project team address those concerns that the community or our chiefs may have. So this project, a little background information, this project actually started around 8 months ago in maybe early December. And so the demolition of Admin 2 on the corner of St. Regis Street and 3rd Street. A little history of the building. It was built in early 70s. It was a government building. For the last, a lot of programs have been utilizing that building. But in 2015, council had made a decision to remove all sectors from the building. At the time, it was a council building. I think Arrow was in there also. I think Hydro-Quebec had an office in there too, so it was getting utilized very well. And at the time, there was health and safety concerns and accessibility concerns with the layout and their general lack of floor space in the building. And so there was the council decision at that time to evacuate it. And they're at GNL building now to use their everyday offices. With the initial project, it was noted that this building had materials that were common at the time during its construction. So asbestos materials. There's lead in the paint on the walls. There's various different designated hazardous material in the building. And at the time, it's felt that there was discussions initially to try to renovate and revitalize the building, but looking at the cost, it was very prohibitive, and the decision was made to just go forward and demolish it and leave the site with a granular top for the time being, while we come together and as a community and decide what type of building should be placed on that location. With that general information and background, I'd like to hand it off to Catherine Gold from Public Service Procurement Canada, which will be doing the project management of the project for the duration.
Thank you, Daryl. So I'm Catherine. I'm the project manager for this project. So we're Public Services and Procurement Canada, and we were hired by Indigenous Services Canada on behalf of the Mohawk of Akwesasne. And so what we do is the procurement, I guess, for all of the projects. So earlier this year, we procured the site studies, both for the abatements and for the condition of the building, to prepare the tender packages. And we're going to be procuring the construction contract to do the actual work. So the plan is that we're going to be tendering the package soon. So the work can start probably in the late summer, and then it will probably run through into the fall. It's not a very long project. They're estimating a couple of months right now. And so we're going to be using procurement set aside for Aboriginal business, which means that a portion of the workforce is required to be done by Indigenous workers. And we're also going to be tendering the work as one package rather than as two separate packages. So the main contractor is going to be responsible for first abating the site and then to do the demolition of the building. So we've got both of the representatives from both of the consultants on the call. So they're going to be discussing, I guess, the brief overview of the scope of those packages. So we've got Stephen Heikla of WSP and then Cameron Flood, our engineer from Cleland Jardine. So I'll turn that over to Stephen, I guess.
There we go. I think I'm unmuted. Thank you, Catherine, and thanks to everyone for attending this meeting today. I'm Stephen Heikla from WSP, consulting engineering firm. So WSP was retained by PSPC to complete a designated substance and hazardous materials survey for the building. Based on previous studies and reports that were made accessible to us and the results of WSP's survey, which included sample collection and lab analysis, our survey identified the presence of asbestos-containing materials and lead-containing paint applications, which Daryl mentioned earlier. So the presence of these and other hazardous materials is very common for buildings constructed anywhere from 1930s through the 1980s. So it was not a surprise. And a bit of background on asbestos. It was widely used because of its versatility, heat resistance, its strength, and insulating properties, used in everything from fireproofing materials in various construction building materials like vinyl floor tiles, insulation, piping, plaster, etc. So asbestos is now a known carcinogen with serious health to associated with it. So regulations and protocols are in place to reduce exposure to such materials and to allow us to remove them in a safe manner. So during this project, these identified hazardous materials will be handled with the utmost caution and in accordance with all regulatory controls in order to avoid any adverse health impacts to workers and any persons in the vicinity of the site. So as for the project abatement plan and the control measures, all hazardous materials or all known hazardous materials will be abated, which is removed from the building prior to the demolition activities by an accredited abatement contractor with trained personnel. The hazardous materials, including asbestos, will be wetted continuously using hoses or sprayers during the removals in order to control any dust generated by the work and to lessen the likelihood of spreading any debris. There will also be hoarding walls constructed around the site perimeter, and all workers within the work areas will be required to don the appropriate PPE, including respirators, while they're doing the work. And all waste materials will be double bagged and disposed of at an approved hazardous materials waste receiver in the area, or as close as possible to the site. So proper monitoring, handling, and disposal of hazardous materials will take place in accordance with all regulatory protocols and industry best practices to prevent asbestos-related illness or any possible exposure to the health, so that there are no health hazards down the line. So as for WSP's involvement with the abatement monitoring, WSP is going to provide abatement supervision and air quality monitoring services for the duration of the abatement and demolition so that we can document any airborne asbestos concentrations if we do find that's present in the air. So WSP will collect air samples from the work areas and have the samples analyzed by a third-party laboratory. And these results will be presented to the project team on a regular basis. So any exceedances that are found from our lab analysis will be reported immediately. So WSP throughout the contract will be in close contact with the contractor to ensure that the specifications are strictly adhered to. And I just want to mention WSP has extensive experience providing abatement supervision and monitoring services on behalf of PSPC. So thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to address any questions or concerns you might have during the question period. So I'll hand it on to Cameron from here.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, everyone. I'm Cameron Flood from Cleveland Jardine Engineering. We're the demolition consultant for this project. We've been hired by PSPC to develop the demolition tender documents, which includes the scope of the demolition, all the required submittals from the contractor, and all the regulations that they'll be required to follow. The demolition scope for this project is a complete demolition of the building, which will begin after the abatement's been completed. The demolition will include the full removal of the building, including the foundations. We'll also be removing all asphalt on the property, and they'll need to remove the existing water and sanitary service lines back to the property line, and they'll cap them so that they can be used on a future project. The site will then be restored with compacted granular material, making a flat site that's going to match the existing grading of the site. All waste from the demolition will be removed from site and properly disposed of. And the contractor will be required to follow all health and safety regulations throughout the project to protect both the workers and the public throughout the project. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Cameron. We'll just go back to Stephen. I think if you could just go through the designated hazardous materials that were found in site, the report that has been approved, and the various different contaminants that the potential contractors will find on site. If you could touch base on those and potential abatement procedures that are common for these types of removal processes, I think that would be helpful.
Sure, no problem. So there were a number of materials, asbestos-containing materials, I'll start with them, found inside the building. So there were vinyl floor tiles just about throughout the building. There were also acoustic ceiling tiles. The drop ceiling tiles were found, I believe, on one of the floors or in some of the office areas. So those will have to be removed. Those two materials, vinyl floor tiles and acoustic ceiling tiles, are considered non-friable. So they're kind of, the fibers are bound within the material, and there's less of a likelihood of asbestos fibers being released during disturbance. So those materials can be removed following type 1 and type 2 abatement precautions, which are relatively straightforward. There's all the PPE requirements, and there'll be enclosures constructed around the work areas so that nothing can get in or out. The other material that was known to be present in the building was vermiculite, and the vermiculite is a loose fill insulation that's used commonly in attic spaces, but also within wall cavities, and in this case, it's within the cinder block cavities. So it's the cinder block wall would have been built, and then the insulation would have been poured down the cavities, so that these walls have a much better insulating quality with them. And the vermiculite isn't actually an asbestos material. Asbestos fibers were actually mixed into that material. So the vermiculite is actually contaminated with asbestos fibers. So in that case, we're gonna work with the contractor to try to make an appropriate procedure. What'll probably happen is the contractor will make holes at the bottom of the walls, and we'll use gravity to our advantage. They'll use vacuums to try to suck out as much of the insulation from the wall cavity as possible. and they'll probably use water, pour water down the cavities to try to wash out just about everything, all the fibers and all the vermiculite that they can. So the bulk of these materials will be removed without doing it. We're doing very little demolition, and just a few holes cut in the wall to be able to remove those materials. And from there, I think that's about it for the asbestos materials being abated. As for lead, obviously lead paint is very, very common in buildings throughout. And there are a few paints identified: gray paint on floors, a few exterior paints on structural columns. When it comes to abating these materials during a demolition, generally, we don't remove the paint from the materials prior to demolition. It's kind of all taken down in one shot. It's considered a type 1 demolition, or type 1 is abatement procedure when heavy machinery is used to demolish building materials with lead paint on it. So these materials with lead paint on it will have a test done prior to disposal, just to make sure that the waste will conform to the waste receiver's requirements before it goes to landfill. But generally, any painted surface with lead paint on it can be disposed of as clean waste, as long as it passes this. It's a leachate procedure test that just makes sure that the waste won't leach any harmful materials, including lead. And as for other hazardous materials, there were relatively few. Mercury vapor is commonly seen in fluorescent lamps and fluorescent light bulbs. And there's silica, which is commonly found in building materials like masonry and mortar and concrete. So there'll be general dust suppression techniques used to keep down any excess dust. And that was about it. There's a little bit of mold growth, but the contractors will be made aware of that. So they might choose to wear a respirator during that kind of work. But that's about it. Are there anything else, Daryl, on that?
No, thank you, Stephen. I think that would basically covers all the designated hazardous material report that will be accompanied with the contract documents for all potential contractors that wish to bid on the job in the coming weeks. With this job and with the current shutdown of MCA, this is going to be a tricky situation, but we are advising the contractors to abide by the new social distancing protocols in place, and to keep community members safe during the demolition time period, construction time period, I guess. And with that, I think that's mostly all the background on this project. We could start leading it into questions. As for the question period, if we can have Cameron or no, Shannon, if there's any questions that came up. I know I did receive a question about that I previously alluded to of reusing the steel and reusing the renovating the building, but due to new building codes and accessibility standards that have been upgraded in the recent years, it has the existing building footprint would be very cost prohibitive until doing those renovations. And so that was one of the decisions that let's take it to the ground and start new with a new concept, or we can lead it to the Grand Chief or the chiefs on what direction we're looking at that site, which would include community input. Shannon, if you're still there, if you have any questions that maybe you could read out or scroll.
So you touched on one of the main questions that we were receiving on Facebook through the posting of this meeting was what is going to be done with the site when it's when the building is gone. And we received the following questions by email. What will be done to minimize the risk of exposure, and how far anything may travel if airborne, as several elders live within the area?
See, with that, it is expected that during the abatement period, the building exterior cladding, the steel cladding would probably still be, but this is something that leads to the contractor's best practices, and at WSP would be reviewing those too, but I envision it, the exterior cladding would still be in place, and then the abatement procedures inside and everything that they remove from the walls and the hazardous materials are bagged, double bagged, and put in a dumpster to be dragged out the front door and put on a dumpster. But once when the actual demolition of the blocks, I would assume that water would be sprayed during those periods, and just to keep the particulate matter from getting into the air and spreading across the different properties. The construction hoarding or fencing that will be going around the site is going to be around 8 feet, I think. So the intention of that is that it will capture most of that debris if it is in a droplet form that is captured by the water being sprayed. And so it would try to contain most of it on site, which should limit that exposure to neighboring properties. And on top of that, WSP and I think our environment division have requested random air testings throughout the project to continue to provide those assurances to the community that no particulate matter was leaving the site.
Okay, and another question that we received was, what year was the refurbishment and demolition asbestos survey completed, and can the public get a copy of the survey?
The actual the designated hazardous materials survey for this project was renewed. It was based off a pension report of a 2004 and a 2013 update. And they use that as the basis for this designated material report that is included in the contract documents. And I do think those can be made available to the public. We'd have to just follow up with the email for the requests. And it's a technical document. It's pretty dry reading, but it is there for reading, review.
At this time, that's all the questions that we've received. If anyone in the meeting itself, any of our community members that have joined, have any questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask them.
I had a question, if I can. My name is Leona LaFrance. I live right next door to the building. And of course, I'm concerned. I do have loved ones that do have health issues. And my air vent is facing that building. I'm just wondering, is there some sort of filter or some sort of monitoring device that we can get in the surrounding homes to, to monitor whatever's being airborne? Because it doesn't sound like the building is going to be like fully tented. You're going to put walls up, but it doesn't sound like it's being planned to be fully tented. So I'm assuming that, things are going to be airborne. The other thing was I have a large garden, and it seems like when you're ready to start this project is the time that we're going to be harvesting. So, that's a concern for me as well. And I guess the biggest thing is that, is it possible for us to get filters on our homes or some sort of monitoring device that we can self-monitor? We can report to someone, environment or whatever. I know something like that would bring me peace of mind. So That was pretty well all, you know, those were my concerns and those were my questions at this point.
At this point, we haven't had anything in place for that type of protection for surrounding neighbors, and it is a new one to me that has been asked. I haven't heard of that one before, but it is a valid question. And with the so the exterior cladding, so all the abatement work will be completed before the actual building comes down. The only dust that will be generated is going to be sprayed with water to keep it from traveling the site. Now, that's not saying that some dust won't be. That's not 100% guarantee, but with those air conditioner filters, a lot of times if you just wash it off with a hose, it doesn't get into it. But we can look further into that if that is needed, and we can with the fruits and vegetables, again, the same thing is best case procedures, probably wash them before they are consumed. I don't see an issue with the dust being on them going into the actual the plant, but if there's anybody that can follow up with that, I don't have a problem with looking into providing additional assurances for you and monitoring material. But we'll have to look into that and get back to you if there's viable options in the market that we can offer.
Okay.
Can I ask, Stephen, can you maybe discuss how often you would be monitoring and what would be involved if levels went a little high? Like, what would be the reaction?
Sure. So we're going to work with the contractor. It'll depend on their schedule when we arrange to do our monitoring, but we'll definitely be there towards the start of the project to collect some background levels, just so that we can make a comparison when there is abatement happening. And during the interior work, that's all relatively low risk. It's going to release very few fibers. The higher risk material is the vermiculite in the walls. And as Daryl mentioned, the vast majority of this material will be removed straight from the wall through a vacuum truck hose and into a contained canister on the back of the truck. And so most of this material will go straight into a bag and disappear from the site. It's any remnant material that's missed during the cleaning. Obviously, the abatement contractors are going to do everything within their power to make sure that these materials are cleaned and removed prior to any dust generating demolition activities. But when we're doing our air monitoring, we can position the monitors wherever you'd like as well. If we wanted them closer to the residential property lines, then we can totally move the locations so that we can get better coverage, and our findings can put your mind at ease a little bit. But we don't anticipate exceedances, because if everything goes according to the specs, and then there should not be an issue. But if we do get any high levels in our lab analysis, we'll contact the contractors and the project team immediately to review what might have gone wrong, and put in place any new procedures or increased maybe spraying or other measures that might help to reduce the concentrations.
And maybe with that, Steve, maybe on top of the hoarding fence, maybe might be a good place just to see if there's any, and just to limit that type of destructive work to days that aren't, there's a heavy wind. So I think that with those measures in place, we could reduce that risk to the neighboring properties. But see how, when we get the plan from the contractor, how that is going to actually facilitate in the field.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So just as a follow-up to where the comment was made, the water that will be sprayed, where does the runoff go? That's my first question. And then Steve just made mention about a project. So how many monitors does a project of this size warrant? Because he said to try to alleviate some of the fears of the local community members close by. How many monitors could we possibly expect, even if it's 2 or 3 blocks over type thing?
Well, we'll be working with the project team to make sure that we get good coverage. I mean, generally we collect our samples within the project site. We can collect it from all 4 sides, and we'll be collecting at different times in different locations to make sure that we get results from differing areas and at different times during the work. So we want to be monitoring definitely during the high risk work, and make sure that we have people on site to observe and make sure that all of the procedures are being followed correctly. So we will be there, and we have to work again with the contractor and with PSPC to make sure that we are getting results in the right place, or the results for the right locations, and make sure that we do have enough to alleviate any concerns. So we may put together a proposal for our monitoring and discuss it with PSPC, and then we'll be able to get buy-in from everyone to make sure that everyone's going to be happy if we're able to present those results at the end.
And could I just follow up with, oh, sorry, could I just follow up to your comment where you said monitoring during high risk times? What does high risk times mean? Is it when they're starting at 7 in the morning, or is it when they're knocking a certain component down? I'm not clear.
Right. Yeah, I'd say just what you said. When they're maybe doing activities that might result in a higher release of dust. So during the demolition itself. During the interior abatement, type 1 and type 2 procedures, that they're very, very low risk. Everything will be well contained. The materials themselves are non-friable and a lower risk material. It would be, I'm talking about more during the demolition when there's a greater chance of dust being released. So, and you mentioned about the water.
Yeah,
that they use. Right.
I would assume that the any runoff water is directed toward a catch basin with a filter fabric on top of the catch basin inlet, and that filter will catch any, depending on the micron size of the particulate matter, that filter fabric will catch all that material. And at the end of the job, it's just removed and properly disposed of at the same landfill that the hazardous waste material has went to.
Thank you very much.
That's correct. Yep. If during the abatement itself, the water is used to clean the materials, the water becomes contaminated potentially, and so it has to be disposed of as hazardous as well, unless it is treated and filtered on site.
We received one other question. Should any type of accident or emergency occur, what emergency measure plan do you have in place?
That would be up to the contractors to devise. Whoever the successful bidder is, they will have safety measures and procedures should a incident occur on site during construction hours or off-peak hours, and depending on location, it varies. So we would put that to the contractor, that he has to submit those types of protocols, and that would be reviewed by the project team, probably WSP. Or,
yeah, so we also have standard, I guess, requirements for health and safety, and that would be part of that as well. So it would also be reviewed by those people at PSPC.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I'm also right next door to the building. I'm the big yellow house right beside the building. So I have like about 4 questions. I know you mentioned that the project would take about 2 months, so I guess I'm wondering when the RFP process is completed, when you actually think the start date would be. That's kind of one thing. The other thing, I see the Grand Chief is on the Zoom here, and so there must be some ideas for future use of the lot. And so I'm interested in that because, again, it's right beside me. The third question is about the impacts of capping off the utilities. Like, we're always having problems with our phone lines. So I don't know like what the impacts of capping off the utilities are. Probably, maybe nothing, but you know, I just wanted to ask that question. And the fourth thing is, again, I'm right beside the building, and there's a lot of graffiti on it. And I own the fence that divides the property from my line over to MCA. And it's a mess there. Like, if you're going to be starting demolition maybe 2 or 3 months from now, or whenever that's going to happen, the lot should be maintained and cleaned up. It looks terrible. I make a lot of effort to make my property clean, and I think that Mohawk Council should also keep that property clean. There's weeds all along the fence, and since it's my fence, I keep my side clean, but Mohawk Council should, you know, clean that. And again, the graffiti is something we can't really control, but you know, we should try to make that property look halfway decent until demolition happens. And then I guess the fifth thing is I have asthma, so you know, I'm also concerned about, you know, any of the dust or any of the, you know, refuse that comes off the demolition. So I guess that was 5 questions. Did you get them all? If not, I can repeat them. Okay.
Yeah, no issue. And with the
Maybe we can do them one at a time. I believe the first one was about the tender date, so I can address that one. So typically it's a 20 working day procurement. But often the contractors ask for an extension. So it might be about 1.5 to 2 months before the contract is awarded, and then they would kick off. So that's why we're saying like the late summer and the early fall for the beginning. And it's estimated, I think right now at about 3 months, 2 to 3 months of demolition, just to give you an idea. So sorry, what was the second question? Or is anyone?
Yeah.
The second question was directed to the Grand Chief. It was, what are the ideas for the future use of that property?
Well, we do have, if you want to talk, we do have different areas, but we were looking for direction on which sector would like to utilize that site, or if there were a couple options thrown in the air of either rebuilding a new modern government building for the chiefs in another sector, or maybe giving it up for housing to develop the lot, or leave it as a parking lot for any, because the CI or the admin 1 and 3 and Angus Mitchell buildings have a lack of parking down there. It would be a little walk for individuals or even a school area. So those are a couple of options that were initially thrown out, but no final decision has been looked into. And it was anticipated that with the building actually down, we could fully focus on what the future site of that was going to look like. If the Grand Chief wants to add anything.
Thanks, Dolly, for the question. So I think Daryl's captured it quite well. No decision has been made on what is going to be the use of that property, but you know, there are some restrictions. It is a small lot for one. It's not very big, so that is you know, It is a 3-story building now, but I was always challenged by parking. So, but at the same time, we are short on administration space, but there's also a huge need for housing in the community. So, you know, when we don't have a lot of lots to put housing in, as a resident of Ganadago, you know that, you know, it's very limited on housing, available housing to expanding families, new families, you know, single families. So that's a priority as well. But as, you know, as a longtime community member as well, you know that a lot of these things are driven by resources too. We have, you know, it's where we're going to find capital dollars to build some of these things. I will say that there's probably likely more ability to get some dollars for housing than there is to build a new administration building in there. So no decision has been made as of yet, but you know, the input of neighbors and the district and priorities is extremely important to us, and you know, we'll be listening to that in the next little while. Once this building is taken down and you know, taken care of, we'll then begin the planning phase.
And moving on to your third question, I guess, the capping of utilities would not.
I still have one more point. That corner of the property was my father's property, and he sold it to Mohawk Council several years ago. And if I remember right, I guess it would be something we'd have to research, but it seems to me there was an agreement or limitations for how the property could be used. And I think that's something that we should look back at in terms of when the property was purchased, because I don't know about housing, you know, on that particular corner. I think there was an agreement that property would only be used for like administrative, for like a government building. That's what my father sold that property for. So I would request that there be some research done on what was the agreement for the sale of the property. And then, yes, the third question was related to, capping the utilities. Like,
so I'll follow up with your questions and that of the general site maintenance, the capping of the utilities, the water and the wastewater services won't have any effect on any of the existing Mohawk Council provided services. The Bell line and the hydro, I don't expect it to have any impacts on the surrounding neighbors also. That's Bell and Hydro, Quebec Hydro's utility lines that they will be brought into the discussion with the contractor to try to coordinate those capping of the services when the time is prudent during the demolition period. And the general maintenance of the site, once the contractor has it, is he's to maintain it, and there are notes to protect the existing fence there. As for the weeds on site, the building has been evacuated, and we've tried to provide just general oversight of the building. And as for the graffiti, it is a police service issue that a lot of our facilities in the village are getting tagged, and I know police services are looking into that, and I have no follow-up on that one. Hopefully we answered most of your questions. I think we got them all.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm like Leona, you know, I'm on the other side of the property, and you know, there's a lot of implications, like Abram mentioned, in terms of the use of the building originally as a government building. You know, parking was an issue. You know, there's other issues that impact how that property would be used, but you know, they also need to remember that I'm the neighbor next door, you know. And again, I just, go ahead.
And any decision to go forward will be put to a public meeting at a later date of when the actual decision, but public input would be welcome during that time, and all the land issues would be researched and further identified as any issues.
Okay, Chief Joe Lenore, question.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Chief Joe.
Okay, I have a question on the dust control after hours when I guess they're gonna work 8 hours a day or whatever, and when they start removing the walls, like yeah, you're gonna be vacuuming it during the construction, but when what's gonna happen when you guys stop working at 4:30 per se, and the stuff, is that gonna be like airborne by itself if the wind comes up during the night? Or is that all gonna be capped? Because I just heard earlier there was only going to be like an 8-foot wall around the whole thing. What's going to happen to all that if it's not dust, if it's asbestos that's floating around that you can't see? Is that going to be capped? Is that we're going to have to tell the people that's going to be some kind of control over that?
So it would. Any procedures after hours would be incorporated in the contractor's procedures, abatement procedures, and I anticipate those after hours work. But anything with that, spraying the dust down, spraying it down, and when it dries, as long as it's on the ground and on the solid, it's not getting in the air. And those construction fencing are going to be solid. I'm assuming plywood walls, so the wind would have to be pretty hard to stir up to neighboring, but also it's something that if we expect a thunderstorm or a wind occurrence during the night, that we could anticipate contacting the contractor to make additional precautions.
Okay.
I have 2 more questions.
Go ahead, Joe.
You made mention, I forget who made mention of the site will end up a flat site, and Dolly brought up some good points. But is there a specific waiting period where you can actually build over it anyway, given the fact that you're covering up something that had, hazardous materials? It's like our dump. We covered the dump and nobody was allowed to build over it for X amount of years. So that's my first question. And then my last question would be, I forget the lady's name from the government, WSP maybe. You said a percentage of the workforce is to be indigenous. In your experience, what's the normal percentage on a contract of this magnitude?
So with the, we basically have our own percentage with our contract documents that we did forward to PSPC, and they incorporated, and they had their own that was very similar to ours. But usually it's very low, but it is in there to facilitate local labor being utilized to the potential. And as for the federal, what is their average on jobs like this? I'm not, I'll let Catherine address that. I'm not sure if there's statistics readily available for this. But on the other front, with this demolition, we are removing all the, so technically once the site is a gravel parking lot, there would be no restrictions to either keep it there, or if we have a project ready construction, to move right into that construction phase.
Oh, and I forgot one last thing. Are there any border restrictions to the contractors for especially where the waste might be trucked off to?
So that is something that is a particularly hard thing, since the location of the site is in Quebec and the nearest landfills would be in either Alcoa site or La Flèche or Syracuse. So it would be up to the contractor to hash out any of these border issues before they tender their job. And so that price is built into their tender bid so that it is off the contractor or the consultant's table, that they don't have, that's the contractor's duty to give us the landfill receipts that the site has, that the material has been properly disposed of.
Thank you, Daryl.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Joyce King. She is calling in on the phone. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to hear her, but she's with her mother and they have some questions. So go ahead, Joyce.
Hi, this is Angie. I have a question. You said you're going to spray it down. and I was wondering the runoff, the water, the closest drain is at the corner, and that water goes into the river. So what, is there going to be anything in that water that you're spraying down? You know, will it get into the river?
So with that average construction, there is going to be filter bags placed on the inlet of the catch basin where it's draining to, and that filter, those filter bags come in different micron sizes. So depending on the material asbestos, we have data that, okay, it's 5 microns wide. So then there's filter fabric that can pick up that type of material, for instance.
But is that some of it going to go into the river?
The outlet for the stormwater drain is in the river, and we can have our environment division test that. Those will take water samples during the construction, if that will ease community members' concerns.
Where it goes in, it's in the river, the pipe from that drainage. So that's what I was wondering about the water.
Well,
is it going to be contaminated or in any way?
We don't anticipate it being contaminated, but there are catch basins right before in the water where we can take a sample downstream, right next to the outlet, that can be utilized for sampling purposes to alleviate any concerns.
Okay, I have another question. There is a business right across the road, and they sell food. So if he has to close down, how can he be compensated?
I'm not sure of the business. That would have to be something that we'd have to look into. But with that, the air monitoring that is expected to be done can give us a warning of, okay, you need to close down during this day. And I think it would be up to council to possibly go down that road for compensation for minimal closure. But with that was the intention of the constant or the air monitoring that it will take place, is to help alleviate and confirm any suspicion that no particulate matter is leaving the site, and it's all getting contained within the site, and it's getting cleaned up properly.
How long do you expect it to be under construction?
As Catherine had indicated, it's up to the contractor. I wouldn't expect more than 3 months. It is a small job, and 2 to 3 months I would expect, and there would be initial times when it will get pretty messy, but with that we'll have to ensure that the procedures that were put forth are followed.
Okay, I just want to know just how long it would be, and how would we contact you to find out if he should close down or what?
I think our communications division, or myself, or MCA project team, Leslie or Cheryl, and I think we'll have another MCA site representative just observing the site construction to make sure the progress is going forward. And any one of these individuals would be able to voice your concerns to. And I think Shannon would have more on that for the communique and the public flyer that we are intended on dropping off to neighboring properties around that area, which will include general information and contact information, probably going to be the contractor, then MCA Health and Safety, Cheryl Jacobs, or MCA site representative, or Leslie Papineau, or myself, which could be contacted, and we could follow up on that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about too, if you're going to put housing over there. I mean, there's going to be a lot of kids there and the traffic isn't so good. I was just wondering about if you're going to do the housing. Okay, thank you. That's my questions for now.
Yeah, no decision has been made on that decision, but when we get the options and further down the road, we would have a public meeting, which the community would have input processing.
Okay, thank you.
Mona.
Does anyone else have any questions? You can raise your hand or you can go ahead now and unmute yourself.
I had a question. I just wanted to know, can somebody follow up with me, or I can follow up with someone, maybe Daryl, about what I had mentioned about air vents or some sort of monitoring systems for the houses that are in close proximity to the building? Because you know, I would really like to know about that, if that's something that is possible that can be provided, and who could I follow up with that?
You could follow up with myself, or and I can inquire with the project team on if there's any available technologies with that. And sometimes the simplest method is, well, if we give you a heads up the day before, here's a garbage bag to put over the thing, so it just protects that filter from any particulate matter during that day. And that might be the simplest solution to any, but also the air monitoring too will give us an indication of if there's any particulate matter leaving the site. So we can, if you can follow me up with me, I think my email is on the initial communique also. The invitation to the Zoom meeting is on there too. So if you reach out to me, I can follow up with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just for me, Dolly, I just want to comment that we are just currently opening back up the space needs file that was done back in 2012, 2008, I think it was, for inadequate office space or administrative space within our organization. So we're reviewing that right now, and I'd like to comment Angie King's concerns about the traffic flow in that area. That's a really good point to put in, and we're going to put a housing facility there, and then you got kids coming in and out, and there's traffic issues always been addressed in Ganadago, and the air conditioning issue that's going on talks right now. I think if we find some type of HEPA filter sack to put over the air conditioners in the surrounding areas, just to help control the debris, that if it does escape, at least it's a particle catching filter, not a garbage bag, because if you put a garbage bag over them, you're not allowing your air conditioners to breathe. And it's been hot out, and I anticipate more heat going down the road. So we are looking at different things, and the staff at DTS and this project management team being put together is pretty educated. They're well informed. They have the capabilities, and a progress report, weekly progress report, I think would be nice too to put on through communications. And I would like to also welcome Cheryl Jacobs to the team, is because she just took on this new role with the organization. And it's a position that's been lacking for a while, and it's nice to see somebody sitting there now fulfilling this. Welcome, Cheryl. And I like to see things moving forward. We have momentum right now, and I don't want the momentum to stop, and I want to keep the momentum going. As portfolio chief, myself and the other portfolio chiefs are looking at rebuilding in that area. If it's administration, that's yet to be determined, but I'm pushing myself. I'm pushing for a rebuild there. Space is limited, so we're talking 2-story, 3-story, or whatever we need there, but that needs to be identified also. So that's all I have to input right now. I'm glad this meeting is going real well and smoothly. A lot of good questions being asked, community involvement's there, neighboring houses are there for concerns and issues. So I like to see that also. I don't want no hiccups with this project going forward. It's because we're in a close proximity of everyone. you know, you throw a rock in Ganadaga, you're going to hit 3 houses, right, Daryl?
Yeah.
So we have to be cautious and take all measures, make sure all measures are covered, and so we don't have no hiccups down the road. Yeah, go on.
And any future construction on a site, I think, would have a feasibility study attached to it with a component of traffic management of proposed traffic to the site, and that would be covered in that that study report. And so there are many options, but it was a government building, and it was operated for a long over 30 years. So we do have probably historical traffic data in that section that we could look back to and make sure that we're not exceeding that historical norm, I guess.
I have one more. I think it was Cameron that had made mention of the monitoring of the air quality, and you said it will be monitored, and any samples they're going to be sent out. How often do you do it? Like in the morning, at lunchtime, at evening? And you said if there's any exceedances, it will be reported immediately. And obviously, if there is an exceedance, then obviously emergency measures or some type of measures are put into place. But can you give me an example of a project of this size, the monitoring again of maybe certain time frames, or who does all this?
So this is Steve Heckler from WSP. Yeah, when we do these, we collect samples generally throughout the day and then submit them to a third-party accredited lab. Usually we'll drop them off, or if hopefully we're close enough where we can drop them off or get them purulated from Cornwall to the lab, and we'll have rush analysis done. So the analysis will be done within 1 to 3 hours. So we'll have results kind of by the start of the next shift, and we'll be able to analyze them, look over the results, and communicate any exceedances, which I should mention, we don't anticipate any exceedances. For projects of this nature, we've done lots of monitoring, and it is rare to see any issues with the results, because of following the procedures usually results in very little or no asbestos found in our air samples. So usually there would be a reason behind it. If we do find an exceedance, we're usually able to identify what might be causing that, and there'd be plans in place with the contractor. The communication would be such that if there's an exceedance, that the work would likely have to stop until we're able to identify the issue and rectify it.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
No problem.
And yeah, this is a pretty common deconstruction, and you go into big cities like Toronto or Ottawa, it is common procedure so we're basically following that same procedure identified in those vastly more dense populations, so we're moving forward with the precautions on the side.
So
I have a question as well. Dolly can go first, though.
Oh,
As long as it's
no,
not a
I
question
just
for
want-
me, Dolly.
No, it's not a question for you this time, Abram. Vince, thank you for kind of reaffirming that, you know, admin is maybe a better, you know, option for the site here, especially because an admin building was here for so long. But I really support what Angie said. I don't think she's on the call anymore, but this particular corner here on Angus Thomas Memorial and then the cross street, it's a major traffic problem. We've had ATV accidents and crashes there, and people don't follow, you know, the road signs, and it, you know, that is something we need to factor in is the problem of traffic. Not only there, but there's another stop sign the other side of me near the Justice Building, and that one they put a new stop sign there, but nobody ever stops, you know, or they just kind of do a rolling stop. So I just wanted to say that I'm glad that Angie also raised those issues about the viability or kind of lack of viability for housing in that particular spot. So I hope that an admin building, you know, would be something that would be a preferred option. And then, you know, maybe somebody can get back to me with regard to the terms of condition of the sale of that property from my father. So I'd like to, because I do make the assumption that there was conditions. That's it, Abram, your turn.
Okay, thank you for that. Daryl, one thing we didn't talk about, and this actually kind of goes back off of what Dolly said about the property. I noticed that we have, which I know the answer to this, but I want the community to know why we have the government involved in this, right? And because all of our projects, we don't have Procurement Canada involved in this. So I think that kind of ties to why why that's occurring today. That's one of my questions. I have another one as well.
I can follow up on both of them. With the property density and the population density of the in St. Regis, the easements in a bunch of the roads are only 15 meters, and we try for a proper road easement, we would like 20 meters, and that would mean that property owners would give up more of their frontage, their road frontage, and a lot of individuals don't want to. So that's why we got those tight corners. As for people not stopping, it might be a policing issue that needs to be increased in the area. And on Abram's last question, this is why after further investigation of the sale of the building, it was actually found that the federal government owned the property and federal government owned the building, and it was never properly transferred to Mohawk government back in the early 90s. We were trying to track down any documents that indicated it was transferred back to Mohawk Council, and there was no documentation that indicated that it was. So that is why the intention of this project is to have PSPC coordinate the project and run it, and at the same time we can observe their procedures and upgrade our procedures to match theirs if we're deficient in any areas.
Okay, good. The other question I have is, and this is a bit for after the tendering processes. I know that Caitlin had mentioned that there would be through the government procurement process on the demolition, and there's the Aboriginal set aside on this. But I just wonder because we are still in the pandemic, what sort of precautions are going to be given to the contractor? Because likely, I don't think we have a qualified asbestos abatement company that's in Akwesasne, so they likely won't be from the community. So what sort of safety precautions are going to be put in place to ensure that those individuals coming from outside of the community doing the work in our community are not intermingling in the community? The risks are going to be minimized for the spread of the COVID-19.
In that front, there are a couple local abatement contractors that are currently able to do this work, and they did the bridge work in Cornwall, and they did the old Domtar. So there are local contractors that I hope will be bidding on this project, and a lot of Akwesasne Lono do work for them. And as for precautions, if there's outside bidders, I think that would have to be assessed at the time. I know we do have current water treatment plant upgrades in the Ganado where they're coming from outside the community too, and we asked them to basically limit their travel off the job site, and that job is currently being completed within next week or weeks coming, and we had no issues on that.
Okay, thank you, because I think that's extremely important to the community to make sure that we're not bringing in a contractor from very outside the community, meaning Ottawa, Toronto, etc., and then increasing those risks. So thank you, Daryl. That's all I have.
All right, Rose.
So Daryl, I'm glad that the Grand Chief mentioned the issue of the government involvement. Again, I'm going to raise the issue of, the sale of the property originally. My father, because I remember there was Jermaine Benedict and there was others on council at that time, and the land was sold to Mohawk Council. So why is it that the government owns the property now in the building? Because that wasn't the original sale. So that's, I guess, my first question. And then my second question is, I see that there's a few of us that are here from Ganadigal as residents that are, on this Zoom call. But is there going to be a report of this meeting, that's going to be shared with the rest of Ganadigal so that people know what's going on? I guess that would be my second question, but I'm more concerned about the first question. Because the issue of certificate of possession, like this property that I'm sitting on, which is next to, where the building is that we're talking about, like I have a certificate of possession. So what would have happened when my father sold the property to the council? Did they get a certificate of possession? Like, why is it the government owns this property now? So that's it. Those are my two questions.
Yeah, and that was an issue that we were surprised about when we were looking into this issue, and that is why the ISC and public procurement. I wasn't even that old in that time when this building was built, but wasn't even around. But the specifics to that sale are beyond me, and we looked through OVS files for land ownership issues, and after finding no documentation of transfer, it went back to ISC to look into actual ownership of the building, and per government code, they were still owner of the building. Must have been a procedure back that they wouldn't build on the property if they didn't have ownership of the property. And I'm not sure of the proper regulations at the time, but I'm assuming that might have been the case, and it was turned over to the federal government, and they built that building, and they were the original owners. That it never transferred back into council's property in the early 90s. And so as the owner, they were responsible for cleaning up the site. And that's why we brought them in, and we're asking, and we're working side by side with them on revitalizing the site and demolishing that building.
Well, I think it's a real serious concern, because I would have to look around to see if I can find paperwork on my end of that original sale, because this whole block at one time belonged to my family. And so, and I do remember the conversations. As I say, someone like Jermaine Benedict was on council at that time, and there were others. Maybe we need to have conversations with them to ask them what the understandings were and why that transfer didn't occur, to Mohawk Council. And then if the case of the ownership is in question, so, if we decide that we want to put another admin building there, is the federal government going to have something to say about it, since we don't have a certificate of possession? Like, how is the ownership going to be resolved? That's a big deal.
So Dolly, we can chat about the issue of your family's interest in it offline, not on this meeting, because this is public, by the way. So we can research what the condition of the transfer was. I think that likely it's the Mohawk Council acquired it through whatever process, and then turned it over to the federal government so that they could build a clinic that served the community. And then when we closed this building, it's when we then went back to the paperwork and found that it was still in the government of Canada's name. on behalf of Health Canada. So we went back to the federal government and said, look, you have an asset still here that you built, has some issues. We want you to take it down. The government has signaled that they're prepared to do that. That's why we're in this process now. And as soon as the cleanup has been completed, they are going to transfer that finally back to the community. And then we will begin our internal processes, as we've said, on what will be the use of it. So that's where we'll be going, forward with that. But we will look into the conditions of the original acquire from your family, and we can chat about that, not in the public forum.
Okay, thank you. Ava?
Point well taken. Just thank you for that clarification, because I do remember that, Abram, about the medical building. So thank you for clarifying that. My other question was about the notes of the meeting to the public.
Oh, so this meeting is being streamed on Facebook Live right now, and the communications will have a record, and they can link to the meeting at if community members want to view that recording.
Thank you.
Okay, we've received another question via the Facebook Live. I believe you've addressed it partly already, but if you could answer, will the trucks hauling materials out be lined and properly covered so the materials don't leak out while leaving Akwesasne?
So with the abatement procedure, we'll have to speed it up at 2:30. It's going to kick us out, but with the abatement procedure, the hazardous material is double bagged, and it is put in a dumpster that is also double bagged. So that when that dumpster gets put on a truck, a flatbed truck, it is covered and it's fully protected from any particulate matter being released during transport.
I have a question. That's one of my concerns also, was the removal of the debris during the takedown of this building. You know, history has it that contractors in Akwesasne, when they do a project, they take the debris that they're removing from the project and they dump it into somebody that needs landfill on their property. I just want to make sure that the monitoring of the removal of this debris is followed to a certified site and disposed of properly. We don't need some of this material landing in somebody's landfill and running into issues later on down the road. That's one of the biggest concerns here in Akwesasne that happens on a daily basis. So I just want to see strict monitor and make sure it's followed through right to the end of disposal. Thank you.
Yeah, and that would be if it is a local dump site, we would ask our environment division to review the site for proper protocols and if it's warranted, but a lot of material due to its proximity with the asbestos would probably have to go to a landfill.
That's all the questions that I've received. Daryl, if you wanted to make any closing remarks.
Okay, yeah, so this is a good project that we initiated this year, and we look to have a positive reaction within the community and seeing this structure brought down and more to beautify the existing neighborhood. And it is a starting block that is the start of a process of what's going to go on within Ganadago. And I do believe the community will be have a full opportunity to comment on any actions that go on in the site. And with that, if there's any further questions, I'll leave it to Shannon. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here today, portfolio chiefs, grand chiefs, and all the project team. And Shannon, if you could just briefly speak on potential outlets for the recording and locations of where community members can find the information on this project. Thank you.
Yes, after this meeting is over, we'll be posting the complete video onto our Facebook page permanently, as well as the MCA YouTube channel. As well, we'll be issuing additional notices as the project continues. We'll provide updates to the community once the demolition has actually begun and once it has concluded. And if there's any information in the meantime that the community needs to be aware of, that will be shared through all of our public resources, which includes the newspaper and the radio station, our newsletter and website. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can continue to ask them. Email them to communications@akwesasne.ca, and we'll make sure that Daryl and his team here are able to answer them.
All right. Have a good afternoon, Oana.
Oh, no, thank you, Daryl.
Oana.